Graham Parsons. Graham is a PhD economist trained in regional economic development and environmental economics at the University College of London in the UK. He has taught at the Universities of Manitoba, Saskatchewan and Regina, and for over 40 years, Graham has practiced economic, environmental, urban, rural, agricultural, community, and transport development as an academic and senior public servant in the federal and provincial governments. Consultant to industry, trusted advisor to governments and international development agencies, and the first chief economist for Western Canada for the Canada West Foundation. Graham has been involved in many aspects of Saskatchewan and Canadian economic and agricultural development. In August of 2018, Graham spoke to the United Nations International Conference on Drainage and Irrigation on Lake Diefenbaker experience in Saskatchewan, Canada. And most recently, he engaged in advancing the Westside Irrigation Project in the Upper Qu'Appelle Conveyance. Graham was born in England, grew up in Guatemala, has 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren. He works across Canada and around the world and now lives and works in Calgary to be closer to his family, although previously lived in Saskatchewan for 42 years and has been a bit of a linchpin around here for and a lot of help for our organization in the past. So we welcome Graham and his presentation on the 21st Water, Wealth, and Saskatchewan's Future. Thanks, Graham. I'll turn it over to you.
What I want to talk to you about today is really 21st century water wealth in Saskatchewan's future, and specifically how 2 major water development projects can create new social, economic, and environmental platforms for sustainable 21st century provincial growth. It's really a question of how you can marry science and technology with secure water projects. And I want to do this, though, looking at partly what we've done in the past successfully, and then to look forward at what the big issues are. You've heard this morning quite a lot about the details of the projects, how the programs work and whatever, but there are some bigger questions here, and I want to focus on those as well today. So Prairie Canada has a history of succeeding in spite of seemingly impossible odds. 2 Prairie Canada cases in particular show how we've been able to beat the odds. The first was Palliser, who told us not to proceed with agricultural settlement, and the second were the droughts of the 1930s. And there are lessons for us in both of those situations, and there are also the foundations of what we have today as a major new irrigation opportunity. So the case 1 of John Palliser, Captain John Palliser, the government in England tells him to come to North America, look across Canada in the west and see whether we could settle those places. And of course, he comes back and says, no, it's just too dry. It's got a big water deficit. And here we have the term that we already know as the Palliser Triangle, big triangle in the middle of the prairies, which is just too dry to grow things, apparently, according to Mr. Palliser. However, Palliser said no, but look at Victorian transportation and agricultural sciences. They come to the rescue. Steamships bring people to the land of opportunity. The railroads join the prairies and get whatever we're going to grow to the markets. Grain elevators, absolutely brilliant Victorian way of keeping the grain dry, arranged for transportation every 8 miles. Oxen and steam engines clear the land. The immigrants learn to be farmers, and Dominion farms teach modern farming practices. They learn about summer fallow. And the result is we create a legacy for Canada's future. It is, in fact, the breadbasket for the world. Here you can see it in terms of those early years of wheat production. It goes up and down, but the 10-year average is very high. But more importantly, we set the foundation for Canada's biggest export economy for years and years to come, and the centre of farming in Canada. 62% of Canada's agricultural farm acres were in the prairies in 21, and it's up to 82% 2016. Saskatchewan 30% and nearly 40%. It's the foundation. And why did it happen? Because of an agri-economic revolution on farms using dry lands, using the latest science and technology. It's a foundation for irrigation. It starts very early on, essentially with flood irrigation. Here you can see the Battle River up in the little picture on the left. But perhaps more importantly, the CPR built large aqueducts and canals to provide water for the dry lands. The government had given them the lands to build the railroad, but they couldn't sell it, and they didn't have any money to build the railroad. They couldn't sell the lands. Well, when you watered the lands, they found that, yes, you could grow things on it. And it was an early foundation in southern Alberta and southern Saskatchewan to a degree at irrigation. Don't forget it. And then came the second case, the droughts. The droughts of the 30s were absolutely disastrous. All the while below this average production that had gone on through the 20s, and we dropped down. And it's not just losing crops. It's an environmental disaster. The land literally blows away. It's a human disaster. People have to leave the lands. Municipalities go bankrupt. And what's to be done? Well, once again, the public policy response to a regional and national emergency is the best science and technology of the day. It's institutional, it's scientific, it's visionary. PFRA, the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, is set up. It works in the region with the farmers, with the municipalities. It's in the field. It's not distant in Ottawa. And it brings the best agricultural science and technology at the time to play. It does a lot of foundational infrastructure, water infrastructure on irrigation, water management, shelter belts, many small reservoirs, and most importantly, it's adapting prairie agriculture to a drier reality. And it reestablishes the export grain economy. The foundations are laid as well for that irrigation economy. And most importantly, and we should never forget it, it is the foundation for one big visionary concept, the South Saskatchewan River Project. It's a simple concept. Here was the Palliser Triangle that came earlier on, and that drought in the 30s was heavily centered around the Big Bend in the South Saskatchewan River. And so they came up with a very simple concept. Build the Gardner Dam, build what we know now as the Qu'Appelle Dam. They will create a lake, a big, long, over 200-kilometer lake. And with that water, you can start to distribute it, mainly for irrigation and agriculture, but also for other purposes. And when you've done that, you will have created the basis for a new form of agriculture. Well, the ideal and the concept was very good in terms of increasing yields and production, energy, tourism, ag value added, all of those sorts of activities. But as we go ahead, we start to realize that Lake Diefenbaker's irrigation development potential was never realized. There were around 1 million acres around the lake that could be developed, but only 100,000 ever were. And most of the acres on the west side were never developed. Indeed, lands all the way up towards North Battleford, out to Rosetown, we never saw the vision for irrigation developed in the plans by PFRA in the 1940s and 50s. They never developed as a meaningful response to the droughts. The concept, the vision, was never fully realized. And what we were left with is what some of the pictures you saw from the Water Agency this morning, they're still there. Basically, it was an investment of public monies that were wasted because they were never finished off. Trees growing in canals that were empty, running, basically costs that never should have been incurred. But here we are in 2020. After years of literally study by two large Saskatchewan irrigation projects are now in development. They've been brought back onto the table using the waters from Lake Diefenbaker. I won't spend much time on this. You've just heard the details, but basically the Upper Qu'Appelle running forward from Lake Diefenbaker up here, all down to Buffalo Pound. And with that access to water, you can irrigate. And here are lots and lots of pivots. 100,000 acres. Take your numbers, they go up sometimes, down a bit, but lots of acres. And then the Westside Irrigation Project. Here are the old maps to be developed out in stages, all the way from the Battlefords, all the way down Rosetown, Conquest, all the way through. Certainly never realized before. Finally, we're seeing the realization. Indeed, when done right, I can see the water running in both directions. Lots of flood management, lots of water management capacities between the North and the South Saskatchewan rivers. Now, the economic analysis of these two big projects shows what you won't expect. These are big numbers. $4 billion, GDP goes up, fiscal returns to governments, lots of labor income, thousands and thousands of jobs. But I really don't want to focus on those particularly. I've done a lot of this work in the past. You've seen the numbers. What I want to get down to is why this is important beyond just the short-term numbers that we do in pieces of economic analysis. Firstly, irrigation development is more than just these numerical statistics. There's a bigger picture, a much, much bigger picture. Now, at its core, irrigation is a farm investment and productivity project, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. There are higher financial returns per acre. With crops each year, there's less accumulated debt. There's higher value added crops become possible with secure water supplies. And all of this leads to higher farm incomes. And you can see the little chart here, which is looking at the ratio between irrigation and dry land returns. Spring wheat, 4:1. Barley, 3.6. When the number's over 1, the irrigation gives a better return than the dry land. These are big numbers, and these are taken from all sorts of places at different times. These are focused on southern Alberta. But in time, the irrigation infrastructure will be far more transformative than just on the farm alone. But it's also the environment, the society, the economy, and the very future of Saskatchewan that this irrigation spending really depends on. A lot of people say, why spend $4 billion on a few farmers? Even if there's going to be double the number of irrigation farmers, it's not that many, is it? Well, look at the distribution of $3.6 billion of economic benefits from irrigated agriculture in Alberta. 10% of it here goes to farming, but nearly 50% goes to ag processing, just here. And then there are the forward and backward linkages that are nearly 40%. And then there are a large number of other water management benefits, environmental benefits, and all of these together represent that $3.6 billion. So it's far more than agriculture alone. Let's look at some of these pieces. Irrigation and crop diversity equals higher net farm incomes. Higher quality crops and higher value crops with higher yields and then no crop failures, that means reliable, high quality volumes of foods. And those are the foods, because they're high quality with higher yields, that are perfect for food processing. And if you have food processing, whether it's from Cavendish or some no-name sunflower facility, they're going to be local facilities, rather than distance facilities, as opposed to exporting, for example, the grain into the international export markets. And that, because they're lower, they have lower transportation costs. All of those together give higher farm incomes. And then there's the new processing of these crops, which creates new rural economies. New rural economies, for example, from fava beans or peas. Here's the new Manitoba plant in construction by the French firm Roquette, 400 million. And what are they producing? Veggie burgers. Here's a McCain's processing plant in Manitoba based essentially on 10,000 irrigated acres. We've seen some of the benefits of these sorts of developments in Saskatchewan from its tentative start at irrigation. Here you can see a chart of population change on the east and the west sides of Lake Diefenbaker between 1921 and 1951 and 1951 and 2006. So the west side was never irrigated. Its population declined in the first period, and in the second period it continued to decline. Here is the red bar, the east side, which did get irrigated. Its population declined through to 51, but look how it grew. And this was Gillian's story about outlook. It's only through here shown for 2006, but you can expect far bigger changes in the future. Irrigation, many seem to think, is simply using an awful lot of water. We should start to associate irrigation with water conservation because it's a practical adaptation to global warming, but the large irrigation schemes, such as the ones now being considered, also have huge savings in terms of their water conservation possibilities. Look at what's going on in Alberta at the present time from the large irrigation systems that are being put in. Converting the canals to pipelines equals evaporation and seepage savings, over 100,000 acre-feet per annum. Precision water measurement and management means even greater savings. Now I'll talk about those a bit later on. Deeper storage means fewer evaporation losses. And in this particular case, because Alberta actually doesn't have that much water and it doesn't really have that much land, they're reclaiming 60,000 acres. That's how worthwhile they think it is. And we shouldn't forget the significance of what's already going on with respect to on-farm irrigation and water conservation. Some of it's underway. We started with a lot of flood irrigation in various forms. Then we moved to wheel move and hand move systems. Then we moved to the big center pivots with the high nozzles, and then the drop pivots. And every time we move along this from one system to another, we increase the efficiency of the water systems from 30% in contour flood maybe down to 90% when we finally get down to drips. Associate irrigation with water conservation because it is a water conserving industry. In addition, there's precision agriculture, which is on its way with huge on-farm water savings from far more efficient water delivery systems. Here's things that have happened on the left side column here, which really have to do with the previous slide. But on the right column, we have water supplies that are now being measured more closely meet the moisture requirements of plant growth and soil moisture, and water supplies that are now supplemented with nutrients to again more closely meet the needs of the plant and the soil for soluble delivery of fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. Precision agriculture is starting to measure and monitor soil monitoring and mapping, soil nutrient testing, water holding capacity, water use. The significance of this is that it's 77% lower energy costs when it's applied, 50 to 60% less equipment use, irrigation water use, which you pay for, fertilizer and herbicide costs. And at the same time, you get higher crop yields and quality. And that means better prices, particularly if you're processing. Excuse me, I'll just take a glass of water. The South Saskatchewan River Project, that infrastructure is a system-wide water management network in wet and dry years. It's got two basic elements that I always look at. One is the storage reservoirs, whether they're large lakes, whether they're smaller storage ponds, whether they're balancing reservoirs, whether they're wetlands. That's one element of it. And the other are the water distribution networks themselves. Together, they all provide storage for both drought and flood years. We're going to find it's an essential response to global warming. Because when we can store more water in sensible places, we also can create water movement options to deal with the situations that do occur, whether they're floods or droughts, and they improve water security over very large areas. We can get additional sustainable water storage in aquifers as well, storing them underground, bringing it up when we need it. We can interconnect with rural municipal pipelines for sustainable rural water supplies. We can save the billions of dollars in drought payments when there are more irrigated farmers than there are dryland farmers. And this is essential for communities, industry, value-added processing, and the natural environment. Well, if we're going to have more irrigation, we're going to grow more stuff, more food. Is there going to be anybody to buy it? Well, in spite of the pandemic, there's still going to be more people around the world who need to be fed, maybe a couple of billion extra. World population seems to be slowing down a little. But there's also going on a global growth in incomes. And that means changing diets. Yes, McDonald's is in Asia. Western preferences of more meat, pork, all of these are changing demands. But at the same time, these same global markets are losing their own agricultural lands. China lost 25% of its best agricultural lands in 10 years. It's amazing. Global warming is rising sea levels, particularly with respect to deltas. And deltas are often the most productive agricultural lands in the world, getting three crops a year off. So it's more than just irrigation for Saskatchewan. It's also adapting infrastructure for a warming planet. And it is getting warmer, and we don't need to deny it particularly anymore. We will have to deal with it. One of the big 21st century global warming challenges, which is a big picture issue, which is real, is our limited ability to feed a growing world population. In many areas, we're going to see reduced yields from crops and livestock in higher temperatures and the extreme weather events of droughts, floods, and storms. Dryland rain-fed agriculture is going to become less reliable, and some production will be lost. Arable lands in the deltas are being lost already, and more will happen with rising sea levels and the melting of the poles. Arable lands are being lost to global urbanization all around the world, and we're probably going to lose more to pests and insects. New York Times talks about a global food crisis after the coronavirus, and it's got lower levels of global food production have very clear consequences for humanity at scales of emergency well beyond those experienced in the 20th century. Now, Palliser said this land is dry. That was in 1858. It was, and it is. We do get periodic drought. It's getting warmer, but let's not just forget the realities. This is a land that loses more moisture than it gains in most years. And then we get droughts. We're not very good at predicting where they will be exactly, but we know that they come very frequently. In the 20th century, it was 2 years in 10. Maybe it'll be 3 years in 10. We need to be realistic about this. And it is here in Saskatchewan right now. These are just some pictures. We can talk about exactly what the details are. We're not great at predicting it, but just look at the land in terms of the big storms, the floods, where this water goes, and the other side of it are the droughts. David Phillips, the Environment Canada meteorologist, said in 2017, it's almost like nature has forgotten how to rain in southern Saskatchewan. But in fact, we did have water. It was in Lake Diefenbaker and in other places that we could have used. There is an upside for the prairies. Agronomic changes from climate change probably mean more heat units, higher yields, 5 to 30%, faster growth with increased carbon content, a longer growing season, increased vulnerabilities to pests and infectations, spelling error, opportunity for crop diversification. They say that the largest yield gains will occur in water-stressed regions, such as the Canadian prairies, due to improved water use efficiency with elevated carbon dioxide levels. In this case, carbon dioxide is good. But what's the criteria for that? Getting these benefits to us? The essential requirement is to thrive in this new prairie climate, and that means water security. Let's go back to food again. And let's look at first what, in fact, we're importing into Canada and the prairies. These are vegetables, the top vegetables that turn up in the import lists in 2019. And Canada imports $4 billion each year of them, and the prairies imports 600 million, that's all. That's an interesting observation, I find, when I look at those statistics, because here I find that most of the items on the import list are already field grown and greenhouse grown in the prairies already. Interesting contradiction here. There are market opportunities in these areas alone. And then there's the big question of Canada itself and its identity. Here are pictures from coast to coast to coast to coast, and in the middle you can see Toronto, and that's where people live in big cities. Wonderful. But what's the real image of Canada that's missing in this picture? Well, it's the landscapes of the prairies. Landscapes that are part of that great image from Rocky Mountains through landscapes. Those are the visions that we as Canadians identify with. And who looks after those landscapes? Well, the stewards of most of the southern lands are farmers. And irrigation farmers not only crop the land, but they also strengthen, develop, and improve the soils. They create wetlands for wildlife and tourism. Most of the wildlife reserves in the prairies are fed by irrigation systems. These are the essential features of Canada's landscape that are maintained with water systems that protect against drought, improve security against floods. It's an essential Canadian landscape, and it's a waterscape for city and rural folk to enjoy as Canadians. And it's a contribution to Canada that's too easily forgotten and just taken for granted. It has value. In my mind, there's no reason why all those city folks couldn't in fact be paying for that value. And then we should not forget just how advanced Saskatchewan's science, technology, agrology really is on a world stage. Early tests of solar pivots, working with all sorts of developing countries around the world. They have the best prairie irrigation science and technology in places like the Canada-Saskatchewan Irrigation Diversification Centre. These are units that are recognized around the world, and these are part of the additional benefits that develop out of developing the irrigation economy. It is training and education with communities and farmers. It's irrigation agronomic research. It's adapting to global warming. It's carbon and water management, soil reclamation. It's the new technology development. It's the precision agriculture monitoring. And so prairie-led, Saskatchewan-led global networks can help with the transition at home and building the new irrigation economy and fighting drought with new water irrigation technologies abroad. One of the big pictures that we need to keep in our mind looking forward is where we can go if we have the mind, the leadership and the vision to get there. Just look at Saskatchewan's history in the early years. It was primarily, you can see here, the grain economy. And then we had the droughts and we did something about them and it expanded that dryland economy. We got more than just wheat and barley and oats. We moved to canolas. We moved to more livestock. Then after the Second World War, we added all sorts of natural resources: oil, uranium, gas, steel. All of these developed as big new parts of the Saskatchewan economy. And they moved, and sometimes I think we kind of got hooked on them as what the Saskatchewan economy should become. We got the crack cocaine, as it were, of all of these royalty revenues from oil and gas and uranium, and they just carried on forever, and they seem to be the easy way to go ahead. But if you look at the 21st century, it's possible to introduce an irrigation and food processing platform. And once again, the economy can grow and expand. We build the infrastructure, we develop the 4 billion, and it's just a start. And then we develop the processing that goes around it. Saskatchewan's potential for short and long-term irrigation development is absolutely huge. 2008, we estimated there were 2 million acres in the province. That's a lot more than we're looking at the present time, but nonetheless, we have a long-term future in this area. And every time we move into it, we can develop new foundations for irrigated agriculture value chains. You can see one here associated with livestock, moving through all sorts of further processing, all the meat packing you can think of, but also into pharmaceuticals, pet foods, all sorts of areas. And there are lots of new foundations for different agricultural chains. But the current social, economic and environmental challenges have effectively stalled prairie and Saskatchewan transformative growth. The prairies in Canada right now face a triple threat: a pandemic-led COVID-19 recession, social, environmental and economic disaster in many respects. Downtown Regina, absolutely empty. Coronavirus stops everything. Everything comes to a halt. We've lost all of the oil and gas investments. And really, where do we go? Good grief. Will it never end? Is our future just predetermined like the witches in Macbeth? Can nothing be done? We must do something. We can't just join Charlie Brown on the bench. Well, look ahead. Turn prairie limitations into national assets. Invest in prairie water infrastructure development to realize the irrigation development potential of the area. Complete the unfinished South Saskatchewan River project. Capture the secondary benefits and build a diversified world-class prairie agri-food and energy economy. And in doing so, we get all of those numbers. We get resilience from a warming planet. We reduce the government billion-dollar government payments for crop losses. We created a world-class centre of excellence to feed the world through irrigation and improved water management. We restore investment and economic activity at a level that is sufficient to take ourselves out of the coronavirus crisis. It's sustainable Canadian economic growth. There is a higher purpose to pursuing prairie economic recovery this way. And it's so much more than just public irrigation investment for farmers. It's recovery from the pandemic recession. It's investment replacement and recovery. It's foreign food import replacement. Why shouldn't we be self-sufficient in food in Canada? We can adapt to global warming and get the best agronomic benefits out of it. We've got the food and water sustainable technologies for the planet here, and we can sell them. We improve our water security in doing this. We get sustainable growth for our rural communities, and we're looking after our lands. And that's not a trivial item for our children and grandchildren. They should have a good, clean, well looked after land to live in. It's time to irrigate. I think so. So irrigation development can be seen not just a farmer program, but it's a prairie and a Canada recovery strategy. There were setbacks on this prairie journey, but resilience, perseverance, science and technology prevailed. We overcome Palliser. We overcame the dirty 30s. Today, this is a large strategy to replace and expand on the investment and economic losses of recent years. The prairies have faced these challenges before. They recover, and like the phoenix, they arise again and again and again. We will be there in the 21st century, and if we have our minds set to it, not to continually study it, not to turn it into bureaucratic committees, not to turn it into endless evaluations that never come to fulfill, we can, in fact, do it again. Thank you for listening. I'd be pleased to take questions. Hello?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Graham. That was a terrific presentation. Very comprehensive view, very inspiring. And I think you covered a lot of the sort of the global pictures, some to right down to the local, and I think you gave us, you know, a very clear vision of what this sort of technology could do for us. So, terrific. Are there any questions for Graham?
I know it's coming up to your lunches, but I'd be happy to take questions or maybe offer some observations on some pieces that other people have asked questions on.
Yeah, lots of great comments. I'm not sure if you've got the chat up beside. There's
I need to drop off this? Hang on, I can't see anything. That's all. Oh, now I can. Yeah, I can see you. Yeah, bring forward the questions, and I'll see if I can answer.
No questions so far. Just a lot of accolades. So yeah, a lot of great comments from the people that enjoyed your presentation. One of the things I really appreciated is I think that you highlighted was the fact that this is not just, obviously you demonstrated quite clearly the economic impact for just agriculture, but also you highlighted the fact that, you know, what we're doing is we're also, you know, we're creating reservoirs which could be used for, you know, aquatic habitat, or you're also creating places for leisure and for tourism, and we have opportunities now to use the same infrastructure to not only distribute but also clean and remediate our water, and really it's just using this infrastructure to become caretakers and conservationists of one of our more precious resources. So that came through very clearly for me, and I think that's a message, you know, when we're looking for, you know, basically some buy-in from the society at large, from people who are a little bit more estranged from agriculture. I think you know, that's the message that will be imperative to get people to come on board for projects like this, and also contribute to help make sure that we do it right. So yeah, very well presented.
I think that some of these issues are too often left behind, and we don't stress them enough. With irrigation, one of the things I think everybody realizes is that this doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But that also means, it probably means more for our children and our grandchildren. And I think that there are only a few number of people in the country who are actually looking after what is that core of the Canadian identity, which is our landscapes. And it is the wetlands, it is the natural areas, it is the mountains. But from an irrigation point of view and from a landmass point of view, it is these prairie lands, in fact, that are the largest numbers of land, and we've got some wonderful people looking after it. If we just leave it to the vagaries of the climate, we could go back to the dirty 30s. It's not that difficult to move back there if we just always rely on oil and gas or whatever. I've felt for many years that a well-developed irrigation economy, as they found in southern Alberta, is an essential new building block into the Saskatchewan economy. And I think it's worth getting there. Not for us particularly. I'm old now. I doubt that I hope that I'll live long enough to actually see the canals full of water or the pipelines. I don't mind which. But I do think that for our children and grandchildren, this should be a wonderful future for them. And that, I think, is an important message to get across. There was one question made earlier on from David, I think, regarding how do you make this jump from the process, from the farming to the processing in a significant way. Partly you heard earlier the answer to that with having viable thresholds of quality products to process. That's a critical thing, and Lyle talked about it. But in addition, in the 1970s, I drafted a document which was called the Canada-Alberta Nutritive Processing Agreement. Basically, it was an agreement to target food processing in southern Alberta pretty much beyond sugar beets that they did a lot of at the time, to a number of other areas, and it became a focus and it became a reality. And in 1968, I drove to the Canadian Economics Association in Calgary at their meeting. And I drove because I'd never seen the country from Medicine Hat down to Lethbridge and then back up to Calgary. And back then, there was a certain amount of processing, but not a lot. You go there today and you do that same journey, and there's a lot of processing. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to become proactive, and proactive at going after these people, just as Lyle was in his video with respect to chatting to these people, going and seeing them. I know that in my personal experience over the past years, there has been a lot of money all ready to come in, but they never saw anything. There was no clear commitment to these projects. And in an earlier presentation, I had a thing called a dripping tap. And the dripping tap was simply symbolic of government support being switched on and switched off, and switched on and switched off. And when that happens, that's a disaster for the kind of transformational change that I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, first thing, Graham, I'll get you to so people can see a little bit better. I'll get you to close your tray.
Oh.
Yeah. And then there's a couple comments. One from Garth Weiderman, and I think he highlighted basically what you just ended with is talking about lost opportunity costs to our provinces in the country. That if we don't act on this, that we're missing a significant opportunity.
Yeah, I think so. There are windows and opportunities to do things at certain points in time. Lila is absolutely correct to talk about the aquifers in the United States. In California, must have been 10 or 15 years ago, the state water plan took 400,000 acres of essentially fruit and vegetable production out of production. So because they were going to give the water to the cities, and that's what they did. These are opportunities that are here right now, and we need to be on top of them. We need to focus on them and just go after them. But I'm always, to use an English phrase, gobsmacked by the notion that we import $4 billion of stuff that we can grow right here, right now. Now, there are other sides of this. On another presentation, there are transportation infrastructure for refrigerated movement, for storage, all those. We've been through this in Saskatchewan with the potato barn sort of fiascos. But nonetheless, storage, transportation, refrigeration. These are not new technologies, but they are technologies that we'll need to apply. But we need to keep looking forward and moving with the with where the science and technology is going. And I think that when we do that, we do several things. We increase returns to farmers. We expand the scope of all of those other related economic activities that go on. We get the processing. And we, in fact, build a big new platform into the Saskatchewan economy, which is more sustainable and probably more long-running than oil and gas.
Yeah.
And we should think of it in those terms.
Totally. I've got another question from Marie Casper. Do you think the timelines are reasonable? Is the pandemic an opportunity to accelerate them?
I think the response to the pandemic through these kinds of projects makes a lot of sense. I've argued that before. I'm not a great fan of paying people a lot of money to stay home and do nothing. It keeps consumption up. As an economist, I can tell you that. But in the long run, it's absolutely disastrous, and I don't think it's a sensible strategy, nor do I think spending another $100 billion for just general stuff makes any sense. We should be investing in the things that this country can do in the long run. These are things that will put us back to work, and they have an end run, which is useful. I also think that we should think about collapsing timetables and doing things quicker rather than slower. Part of the thing that has killed irrigation in Saskatchewan, in my view, over the years, has been to endlessly turn it back to a series of studies again and again and again. The studies that are done today are relevant to bring them up to costs, current costs, certainly to introduce the best new technologies that we may have, but a lot of them aren't changing materially from what happened previously. And you know, I did all of the privatizations in Saskatchewan in 18 months, all of them from scratch. Can this be done quicker? Yes, if it's a priority. And I don't think we should accept that, oh, well, we need to study it again, or we need to look at this indefinitely, or we better have another dozen committees to look at it here, there, and everywhere. No, take the decisions, set up the focus, put a timetable down, and get on with it.
Yeah. I've got another question here. On the Alberta-Saskatchewan differences, one thing that is not often mentioned is that Alberta has 69 counties and MDs, where Saskatchewan has 269 RMs. For instance, the Eastern Irrigation District, Alberta's second biggest, has only to deal with the Newell County. Do you think the number and size of Saskatchewan RMs makes it more difficult to develop a large cooperative project?
Through my career, I've done a lot of totally transformative projects. Yes, the number of municipalities is an issue. It has been for many, many years, but it's also a huge problem to deal with. It's like trying to deal with water rights. And they are big, big issues. I think that once you have, I'd argue, larger irrigation districts, then maybe they become the focus to make the reforms around, rather than trying to reform what is a historical reality that we're left with, and is very, very slow to change and incredibly difficult to change. I'm not sure whether trying to change the municipal structure of a province it would be done in my lifetime. I don't think that's possible.
I also have another comment here, and this is with regards to vegetable production.
Mm-hmm.
One concern with vegetable production in the province is labor availability and affordability. Do you see that as an issue compared to regions like California?
No, I think that ultimately all of this is going to generate a labour shortage, and we're going to need to deal with it. And we're going to need to import people, we're going to need to train people, and we're going to need to do all of those things. At the same time, we're also incredibly inventive at substituting capital for labour. And so I think that the combination of a real, whether it's immigration, focused training, all of these together need to be focused and brought together. We've seen that happen in the north with the uranium mines, where for many, many years, there were huge labour problems up there because they weren't bringing in enough people. They didn't really work. But after all the privatizations and they became private mines, there was a completely different structure developed that essentially trained the local people. Now, take irrigation. Irrigation is clearly, like it or not, it's a rural thing, and mostly after rural kids have finished school, they want to get out of the countryside and get into the town because it's more exciting. However, if they see their future in the countryside, more of them will stay, and we'll address those sorts of issues. But no, this sort of comprehensive development requires a focus on all of the areas, but I wouldn't use any one of them as an excuse not to do it. Historically, we've always been, if there's a market and we can do it, we'll find the labour. A lot of people like to live in the country. There's a TV show about moving to the countryside. That'll become popular in Saskatchewan. And then the folks in the country will say there's too many people coming.
True enough. Yeah, well, with every opportunity, there's going to be problems to solve, right? So I mean,
Yep.
that's just that just takes the will and the creativity to get her done. Absolutely. And you're right. Maybe we have to just have reruns of Little House on the Prairie again. And
yeah, it's not. There's nothing wrong in going back. I often think that I'd like the passenger trains and fountain pens. Life would be better without instant Zoom meetings.
Yeah, and I think Aaron highlighted in one of the comments. I think we've got things like the Global Transportation Hub and other things to help with exports, help with market development, and as you say, there seems like there's a local market already, primed up because we're importing a lot of goods. If we can supply that ourselves, that'd be perfect. So yeah.
I mean, there are many other things than vegetables, but can you produce foods that can be sold at home? I think the answer generally is yes. I use vegetables as an example because so many of the top lists on the Canadian statistics show very, very clearly we can grow all of them. So I say, well, why are we importing them and paying the transport costs? Everybody wins. The local farmer wins because he doesn't have big deliveries to make. And if the big, it happens to be a market that is controlled, I know, by just a few large supermarket food companies. Well, if necessary, we build some new ones that compete against them.
Yeah.
And we see those in the supermarkets. I would point out that in I think it's the 1990s through the first decade of this century, there was huge cooperative investment in various ag processing things in North Dakota, which became the center. There's a 14-kilometer stretch down there where you can drive past their food processing plants that have become the plants to go to for all of North American supply. And it's just little North Dakota. It can be done. And But it can't be done unless we do what, in fact, is happening at the present time. There's a political commitment and direction in the right direction to get on with it. And that is a window that should also be exploited and move forward.
Yep, agreed. One other question that came up. So when over 90% of irrigated acres are in irrigation districts, while in Saskatchewan less than 30% are in irrigation districts. Does this pose a problem for expansion of acres in Saskatchewan? I mean, I think some of the plans are for, most of the expansion includes irrigation districts. So do you see any issue?
I see irrigation districts. I do compare to a degree what's gone on in southern Alberta with what's gone on in Saskatchewan. I think there's some merit in looking at where they work well, where they don't work well. If they're a constraint, we should look at that. I think irrigation districts are one of the crucial, what I'll call governance elements here. Can they be improved? Yeah, I think they probably can be improved. Can they be treated better by the governments? Yeah, I think they can be. They need to work well to make all of it work well. And you are the managers of these districts. And I just look at how relatively successful they have been. I just go back to Peter Lougheed and the problems with the irrigation districts in southern Alberta before they relined the canals. And there were some reforms that went on as well through that process, and they're worth looking at.
Got another question here from Jerry Gross. Graham, your message is clearly get on with the logistics to enable the development to occur. Thank you for that. My question is, what public relations programs do the governments need to put in place to deflect the pushback that will occur and allow us to proceed? I mean, other than showing your presentation over and over, what else do we need?
I do think that it's important to have focal points to argue the point properly. Whether that's SEPA, whether that's the government, but they need to get together, and the degree to which they keep talking about the problems rather than the vision of where they want to go is the degree to which the messages get diffused. Early on, when all of this discussion started, I think it was last spring, there was the stuff that came out, for example, from, I think, Saskatoon, but it was basically arguing that, oh, you can't do anything because it's going to be a problem up in the Delta, Cumberland House area. These big questions totally ignore the reality of what we're facing with respect to climate change, and how we may well need to be managing our water, not just in some traditional way. We need, in fact, if we want to secure the waters for the Delta, we need this kind of irrigation water management to be able to secure that. And those sorts of benefits are just not understood. I never think it's a question of just public relations. It's nice to put stuff out, but I think that's kind of last century stuff. I think at the end of the day, there need to be more widespread voices. They need to have common messages that they do develop, and they keep pushing them, but they need to understand that there are arguments, certainly on both sides, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to survive in Saskatchewan. There's an option here which is much worse, which is just don't do it and leave it. And droughts 2 years in 10 become droughts 4 years in 10. And then maybe 6 years. And according to Dave Sochin, the tree ring guy, maybe we'll end up with a 10-year drought. If we've done this kind of water management, we'll have a capacity to be able to handle this. If we don't, it's much worse. And fish don't do well in dry streams. I said that 25 years ago when I did the original water wealth presentation, but it's true. They don't. And if some of our southern internally draining rivers, like the Old Wives area, is going to dry up, we're going to be left with a lot less wetlands, a lot fewer fauna, flora, fish. All of those habitats will be weakened. And yeah, one of the reasons that I still show the pictures of the dirty 30s is we should not forget. Let's not forget. Let's realize that those original farmers, those original people who lived and had to leave, didn't really want that to happen again. That's what we're facing climatically. But we can handle it and handle it well because we're smart. So I wouldn't put it just down to public relations response. I think it's got to be bigger than that, but there does need to be some focus. And I would like to see SEPA stronger and bigger and right at the center of all of these discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
not just as a token we've consulted with you and you're the irrigators, so that it's done.
Exactly. Well, it's the kind of the next question here from Aaron. In your opinion, Graham, when this major infrastructure is built, how and who should be running and maintaining it, keeping in mind for the betterment of the economy as a whole?
It's an interesting question. I know it's a really touchy question in Saskatchewan. In the first presentation I made of Water Wealth, I had a long presentation in there around the Tennessee Valley Authority, which essentially was a single authority to develop the rivers in the Tennessee Valley, partly for nuclear power, partly for a whole load of things, but it had a single focus. The original proposal for the South Saskatchewan River Project had the farmers owning the dam. To generate the electricity, get cheap electricity to actually get the power for the pivots at the time. I believe that this system of water management needs to have a governance structure that understands what the investments are being made for. And they are made for multi-use forms of water. But what we've seen over the past half century, or longer than that actually, is the use of the water primarily for power generation purposes, not irrigation. You know that in recent decades even, there have been water emissions from the dams that have washed away the intakes for all sorts of irrigators along the river. We need to understand that this is an operation which is more than just narrow water management. It's a bigger economic development platform, and it may make sense to look at some options for consolidating how those things are in fact run. I think there are viable options. What I wouldn't like to see is you do all this public investment, and it is good public investment, but at the end of the day, it needs to have a clearer mandate as to how those waters are going to be run and how they're going to get run during droughts, and who is going to be responsible for chasing after all of the processing activities. And those are big questions that I think have yet to really be resolved.
Great. Any other questions from anyone? Again, Graham, thank you so much for your presentation. Again, it was very well received, very comprehensive, and really provided I think a very solid vision of the benefits of what we're on the precipice of. Mm-hmm. So it's very exciting times, very exciting.
Yeah, don't forget what you're going after. It's good, really good. And it's easy to get lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of this, that, and the other. Keep your eye on the ball. Thank you. I appreciate it.